Well, I'm excited about
Well,
tonight's discussion. We've got three Toshindo powerhouses who all
yes,
also happen to be women, or kunoichi. What do you think?
I think I'm very excited about this as well. Always to hear different perspectives, but we've got three very exciting guests that all are have got great achievements not only in Toshindo but in their own lives respectively. So I think we should bring them in. Let's do it.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pull on Dr. Amy Tiemann, Nikki Howe, and Dr. Ana Orejuela. Let's see if we can get them on here.
Hey,
Looks
Dr. Amy.
perfect.
In mute.
All right, can everybody hear us? Everybody's good?
I
Great.
can hear you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you three for being willing to come on and to discuss some of the things that we talked about. I think everybody out there is excited to hear what you say. We're sitting at 40 people watching, which is, on my feed, the highest we've ever had. So no pressure at
Great.
all. But I wanted to introduce each of you. We, as Master Bragg and I were talking about who we're going to bring on, we wanted a group of women that had some consistency in their training and their experiences, but also some unique aspects to their personality and the way that they approach training and that sort of stuff. So as we introduce you, would you mind telling us a little bit about your, I'm going to still it again, Dr. Amy, your superhero origin story, right? Can you tell us how you came to the training? Maybe how you came to martial arts in general, and give like a little introduction. Where do you train now? What's your rank in Toshindo and that sort of thing? Dr. Amy, why don't we go with you first?
All right. Well, thanks for having me. This is really exciting. I've just loved watching the show, and to be on it is really special. So I'm Amy Tiemann, and I've been training in Chapel Hill Quest Martial Arts since 2013. And my superhero origin story is that I actually started martial arts back in 1994, 95, 96. I did Aikido for a couple of years while I was in grad school, and that was my sanity saver. So the good news is then when I started in To-Shin-Do all these years later, it had only been like 20 years since I'd done a role instead of, 44 years. So having that in my background did help me with rolling and moving and just moving from my center and knowing what a haro was. And so even though I really didn't train long enough back then to remember a lot of specific kata, it was really helpful. And I'll say really quickly, so my husband Michael was a guest on the show recently, and I totally disagreed with his perspective on why I started training in Chapel Hill.
But you disagreed with his perspective, or maybe you have your own perspective on why you started training?
That's a really long question, because there isn't I don't know, is my objective reality of why I'm training, is that more objective than why he thought I was training? But to make a long story short.
What is it that got you specifically into training?
The thing that is different is that when Jay and Michael started, I deliberately did not want to start training then, because Jay was about 12 and I had been the main parent for about 35 different activities, none of which had stuck. And so I finally said to Michael, I knew he was really interested. So I said, Michael, you take charge of this. You do the pickup and drop off. You go to the dojo. You can start training if you want, but I need to take myself out of this equation, because maybe I'm too much of I thought it would be too interfering to have me there. So I deliberately didn't train for a year to let them have their space, to make it Jay's activity and then Jay and Michael's activity. And then after a year, I just had so much encouragement from the senior women and the instructors, and specifically I'll say Connie Vance, she saw me sitting there on the bench and she's like, you do not belong on the bench, you belong on the mat. And I did a trial week, and I thought it wasn't for me. And it was because it was really overwhelming. I could do it, but then it was almost too much for my brain to take in. and I would leave, and I couldn't have told you 10 minutes later what we had done, but if I came back the next day, I could do it. I was like, oh yeah, this is what we did.
Okay.
But then I did a women's self-defense weekend, which was more of a deep dive. So instead of just 45 minutes, it was maybe 6 hours in a weekend, and I got to meet everybody, and I got to really, really get into it. And then I was hooked, and I've been training ever since.
Now, what's your, tell us about your current rank and how that relates to your family. It's kind of a cool story.
Yes. So last summer at Mountain Quest, I earned my Nidan second degree black belt rank. And so now we are all Nidan family.
A whole Nidan family. That is really cool.
Thank you for asking that. We are very proud of that fact.
Yeah, you should be. That's quite an accomplishment. We say something like the family that slays together stays together. So really important.
Slaying their curriculum. We should specify. They're doing really, really good at their curriculum. Well, that was great. Let's switch over. Can we jump over and let's talk with Nicki. Hello, Nicki. How are you?
Hi. How's everybody doing?
We are fantastic.
Great.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Why don't you, if you would, give us a little bit of your background and then tell us how you came to find To-Shin Do.
Sure. Well, I have some similarities to Amy's story, which is strange and comforting. But in my early 20s, I started my martial arts training in karate. I had worked with some friends, and Hardy, I've heard you talk about this being kind of like the little bit of why you started Quest Kickboxing, the popularity of Taibo. Mm-hmm. And I had some friends who were like, let's do Taibo, let's learn to kick ass. And I was like, cool, but like, let's go actually do it. And so we started doing these karate classes that also had some kickboxing components to them. So we actually had some sparring, which I really, really enjoyed. Ended up earning a green belt in that discipline, and eventually moved away. I've lived in a lot of different states. So moved away and ended up in North Carolina in 2014 and looked at a couple different places to train online. My husband and I, we had just moved here. We were looking for some way to make friends and be physically active. I had really enjoyed my martial arts training previously, and he was into it as well. So I found the Quest Center website and was really impressed by the instructors' profiles and kind of like how everything looked. Went and checked it out, and also, like Amy, at the end of my first week, I was like, I don't know about this. like it didn't have the same structure as my karate classes had previously, where everybody lined up and we counted off our reps and we practiced our katas, and it felt very unstructured to me. But by the end of the first month, I was all in. Like, I was sold. I'm like, this is it. This is awesome. This is what I'm going to do. And it's been great. But ultimately what brought me to Quest was like, I just was looking to make friends, and I like to hit things. So I think I found my place.
That's all it takes. Yeah. Now you're on the instructor team in our dojo here. How's that been as a transition for you? Just, in brief, we can talk about this more later, but how's that been, as a transition to go from student to instructor?
It's been really weird, and I still can't believe that you all picked me to do this. I think it's crazy, but I'm super honored. But it definitely has given me a different perspective and giving me more insights to my own training, which sounds like a super selfish way to perceive it. But in being able to explain things to other people and watch other people and their movements and their way of learning, it's giving me my own insights to my learning and stuff too. So that's been kind of really neat.
I could definitely echo that sentiment. If you ever spend time teaching something, it certainly allows you to break the concepts down into digestible chunks and gives you a lot more clarity. So thank you for that. Let's move down to newly minted Dr. Ana Orejuela. Thank you so much for joining us. Ana, you've got a really interesting and compelling martial arts journey. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of your training?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you so much for having me here. Let's see. So I actually don't have a background in martial arts prior to finding To-Shin Do, which really kind of happened by chance. So this was back in 2008. I was 19 and I had just moved to the continental US from Puerto Rico, which is where I'm from. And I moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan for college. And I knew literally no one when I moved. And I remember I was walking around campus one day and I came across this group of people that were all dressed in black. And I got closer to kind of see what they were doing. And they had this one person in the middle who was getting attacked by other people around him. I later on found out that that's what we call randori. But what caught my attention was that, you know, the attackers were like coming at this guy really fast and he was barely moving his body. And the attackers all ended up on the ground somehow. And like, he was not using like a lot of punches or a lot of kicks or anything like that. He was just like moving his body like really naturally, like barely moving. So I started talking with them. I'm like, hey, kind of, what is this? And they told me that, oh, they're this training group, which was run by Rob Diaz, who I think actually might be watching. So, hey, shout out to you. So, yeah. And they explained to me like, oh yeah, this is ninjutsu and this is kind of what we do. And they talked to me a little bit about the martial art and invited me to come to class the next day. And I just kept showing up and here I am like 12 years later. But no, like really, I wasn't initially looking for martial arts training. I was really looking to meet people and make friends. That's kind of what got my foot in the door, really. And I think that says a lot about just the Quest community, the martial arts community as a whole, how people are very friendly. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, I trained in Michigan for 3 years, I think it was. And then I moved back home to Puerto Rico for 2 years. And I was traveling back and forth from Puerto Rico to Michigan a couple of times just to keep training. And then in 2013, I was accepted to graduate school in North Carolina and in Charlotte specifically. And my instructor told me like, hey, by the way, it's a little far from you, but there's this school in Chapel Hill, you know, if you want to keep training.
And I was hours away, right?
Exactly. In my mind, I'm like, oh, only 2 hours away by car. Yeah, I'll do that. Sure. So yeah, you know, and when you're traveling, you know, from the Caribbean to Michigan, and also, I mean, Master Hayes at one point was traveling halfway across the world by plane to get his training. And so in my mind, it's like 2 hours by car. Sure, I'll do that. So yeah, I trained at the Chapel Hill Quest Martial Arts for, I think I was there 5.5 years total. And then a year ago, I moved to Tampa, and now I train at the Quest Self-Defense Center here. And I moved here for as part of the last step for completing my PhD, and this is where I'm at now. So yeah, it's been 3 different schools over a span of 12 years. So it's been pretty interesting.
That's great awesome. That it, you know, 3 different schools like that. I would love as we continue the conversation, if you have an opportunity to sort of speak about, you know, comparisons of the different cultures at the different schools and that sort of stuff, because, you know, we're a big community To-Shin Do wise, but each school is its own like sort of micro community, own mini community, and there are, I'm sure, some cultural crossover, but there's probably some unique aspects as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, that's great. Well, welcome to the 3 of you to the show. Thank you for giving us your introductions there. And let's start out. We got some shout outs that we'll get into in just a little while, and some notes that are going out to the 3 of you from some of the women trainees that are involved in To-Shin Do. But how do you feel? And maybe Dr. Pieman, we'll start with you. How has To-Shin Do played itself out in your everyday life? And what are some of the principles of To-Shin Do that you find out that are, I guess, currently working for you, or lessons that you've learned through To-Shin Do that are now kind of part of your daily living? And we'll kind of let our whole panel of women kind of filter this one in their own experience as well. But let's start with you, Dr. Pieman.
Yeah, that's such a great line of inquiry for each of us, because really part of what I needed to convince myself to start training was that it was going to be a lot more than self-defense, because I'd actually already done a lot of training in self-defense. And Mr. Hardy, you might be surprised to know they did a 25-hour ground fighting class back in the day. So, you know, when I had been in my 20s and on my own in California, I took self-defense. And, you know, all these years later, I'm really in a pretty, I mean, knock on wood, like low risk set of situations. So for me, you know, seeing how hard and Michael and Jay were working, how dedicated they were at training as I watched them for a year, I knew that it was a really powerful training, but I also knew that this was going to have to be a life practice to make it worthwhile. And I would say that physically, it kind of turns you into a dancer. And I think that's really a beautiful thing. You know, it affects your body, to me, the way being a dancer affects your body. And I say that as someone who's not a dancer, but I feel that it just infuses your whole being, and everything from, you know, a couple of years ago, Michael slipped on the ice and fell, and he did a break fall and he was fine. That probably saved him a lot of a serious injury. One day I was playing doubles tennis because I'm a tennis player. Someone smacked the ball right at my head, and I just instantly dropped and did a back roll on the court without thinking about it. And I was like a blue belt. This is a long time ago. Everyone was like, what just happened? It was so cool. So really, you know, for all the conscious learning we do, and my background's in neuroscience, so I just think about how the brain works. I think the beautiful power is physically is that unconscious learning. It just gets into your body. And, you know, I earned my NEAT right before while I was still 50. That was my goal, was to test while I was still 50. And so as I'm heading into my 50s, I think this is a beautiful, beautiful art for people at any age. It's the kind of art you can definitely keep doing as you get more mature. And I'm told it takes a good long time to really learn it. So, you know, my goal right now is to stay in the art, stay practicing, stay having fun. And it's really helped me with my lifelong learning. And it's really been wonderful, as everyone's mentioned, making friends. And I will say having friends of every age is just a beautiful gift. So the community has, you know, this has become the thing that the Piemans do. You know, I think every family needs that thing that they do. And, you know, we had a lot of friends, and we lived in Chapel Hill for about 12 years before my family started training. But we've made more friends through Chapel Hill Quest Martial Arts than any other activity we've done. So it's just, it has become part of our lives. And thank goodness I got on that train, because if I had missed that train, I'd be really sad right now.
But they're such a
glad you're on it.
part of our dojo community. You know, I'm glad you're grateful, but we're all super grateful that you guys are part of it as well.
Thank you.
Now,
all right, thank you so much for that. What were you going to say, Hardy?
I was going to pass it over to let's go to Dr. Ana. Like, how's your training affected your life, and what parts of your training are, you know, important in your endeavors off of the mat?
Absolutely. I think one thing that comes to my mind that I think it's been very relevant now, I always love how things that you learn on the mat with techniques and principles, it's directly applicable to your life off the mat. So to give you an example, I remember, I don't know if he's watching, but I remember this was actually with I think it was Justin who taught me this. Like there was one time on the mat where I was supposed to do a kata with Hongyaku, and it failed somehow. And I was like, oh my God, I couldn't do this. Like, this is a problem. Like, what do I do to fix it? And he told me like, no, this is not a problem. This is an opportunity for you to do Gansakenage. This is an opportunity for you to do Uragyaku instead, or something else. And I think just that attitude of looking at problems, not as problems, but as opportunities to grow or to view things differently is something that has really helped me as I progress through life. And also just being able to approach and navigate the world and my relationships with people in a very flexible way is something that has been pretty applicable. And I think also, yeah, especially now with, I mean, everything with the pandemic going on and everything, rather than, you know, seeing like, oh no, I can't go to the dojo in person initially. Like I thought, oh, that's a problem, but okay, how can I look at this as an opportunity to, you know, do training in other ways and to grow in other ways. So I think that's one big takeaway for me that I've been able to apply in different areas of my life. And that's really helped me grow as a person.
Awesome.
Nikki, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, you know, when we mentioned, and Amy said this too, in terms of the community that we build and the friends that we, you know, have made, you know, I've made friends who have become family members, and we have spent birthdays and holidays together. So that has been, I think, for me personally, the biggest impact that joining this art has had on my life, just in general. Outside of that, though, I think the mental health benefits for me have been amazing. I used to struggle a lot with just kind of like generalized anxiety and being out in public with big crowds, and you would never know it by the amount of time I spend at Disney World. But crowds used to make me feel really antsy and really anxious and like borderline unsafe. The training has helped with that 100%. So
if I could interrupt you for a second, Nikki,
sure.
Why, in what way did the training help you kind of overcome that?
The amount of physical contact with people. So I would always get really afraid when I would feel people physically like bumping into me in crowds, and the jostling of it was really unnerving to me. And just being able to have a safe place to practice people grabbing me and like making contact and doing things like that, just it kind of desensitized it and made it me feel confident that I could handle those situations out in the real world.
Sure.
Same thing with jujitsu. You know, this has been mentioned before, but kind of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I have rarely been more uncomfortable than I have been with a 250-pound man putting his weight across my ribs and me not really being able to breathe great, and how, you know, you have to keep your wits about you in those kind of situations, and know that I can breathe. The situation is managed. What do I need to do? What are my next steps? So that component of the training too, which I might talk about our jujitsu in addition to our To-Shin as well in a little bit. But that has been extremely helpful with managing anxiety and stress. You know, and then there's like the Quest kick classes, which if I'm feeling like, and I can just go in and like hit and kick a bag, like I can't, there's hardly any better stress relief for me than doing that.
That's awesome.